him down! No retreat! No surrender!
300 men. That is the number burned into the imagination of the world. 300 Spartans, standing shoulder to shoulder in a narrow mountain pass, facing an army of hundreds of thousands. They knew they were going to die. They stayed anyway. Thermopylae, the hot gates, the battle that has been turned into movies, graphic novels, video games, and 1,000 motivational speeches. And at the center of that legend, the face that launched a million Spartan fantasies, is a man whose name has become synonymous with unstoppable warrior spirit. Leonidas, the king who died for freedom, the hero who defied the Persian Empire, the strongest Spartan warrior who ever lived. But here is the problem. Almost everything you think you know about Leonidas is wrong. He was not a young, athletic king in his prime, fighting with his flowing hair and his six-pack abs against the tyranny of the East. He was an old man, at least 60 years old, possibly older. He was not fighting for the freedom of Greece in the way we imagine. He was fighting because Spartan kings did what Spartan kings were trained to do from birth. They fought. They died. They never surrender. And the 300, they were not a band of brothers who chose to stay out of pure love of liberty. They were a suicide squad, handpicked for a mission that everyone knew was a one-way trip. They were chosen because they had sons. Their family lines would continue. That was the cold, brutal Spartan logic. Leonidas was not the strongest Spartan warrior because he could bench press the most weight or throw a spear the farthest. He was the strongest because he embodied, in its purest and most terrifying form, the thing that made Sparta unique in human history, the Spartan system. The agoge, the lifelong training in pain, hunger, endurance, and obedience that turned boys into killers and men into monuments of discipline. Leonidas was the product of a society that had been engineered, over centuries, to produce the perfect warrior. He was the ultimate expression of a culture that valued nothing but strength, honored nothing but sacrifice, and feared nothing but shame. Today, we are going to strip away the Hollywood fantasy. We are going to meet the real Leonidas, the man, the king, the old soldier who marched to his death knowing that his name would echo down the ages. This is the story of the strongest Spartan warrior. Not the strongest in body, the strongest in spirit, the strongest in will. The man who proved that the ultimate strength is the ability to face certain death without flinching. This is Leonidas, the Lion of Sparta. To understand Leonidas, you have to understand the system that created him. The agoge. The word itself sends a shiver down the spine of anyone who knows what it means. The agoge was not a school, it was not a training camp. It was a brutal, all-consuming, 14-year ordeal that began at the age of 7 and ended only when a Spartan male reached the age of 30 and was finally considered a full citizen. It was designed to strip away every trace of weakness, every hint of softness, every flicker of individuality that might compromise the fighting ability of the Spartan phalanx. The goal was not to produce well-rounded human beings. The goal was to produce warriors who would stand their ground and die rather than retreat. Everything in Spartan society was subordinated to the single, terrifying objective. When a Spartan boy was born, he was not automatically accepted into the tribe. He was brought before the elders of his village. They examined him. If he was sickly, deformed, or weak in any way, he was taken to a chasm at the foot of Mount Leonidas and left to die. This was not cruelty for its own sake. This was eugenics in its most brutal form. The Spartans believed that a weak child would grow into a weak warrior. A weak warrior endangered the entire phalanx. The phalanx, the tightly packed formation of hoplites with their interlocking shields, was only as strong as its weakest link. One man who flinched, one man who broke formation, could doom the entire army. So the weak were culled at birth. Only the strong survive. If the baby passed this first test, he was returned to his family. For the first 7 years of his life, he was raised by his mother, a Spartan woman who had been raised, like all Spartan women, to value strength, courage, endurance above all else. Spartan mothers were famous throughout Greece for their fierce, almost inhuman dedication to the warrior ideal. The famous phrase, "Come back with your shield, or on it," was not a poetic invention. It was the literal expectation of every Spartan mother. A son who returned from battle without his shield had thrown it away to run faster. He was a coward. He was dead to his family, dead to his city, dead to his name. At the age of 7, the boy was taken from his mother. He would never live at home again. He was enrolled in a pack, a group of boys his own age who would become his brothers, his competitors, and his tormentors for the next 14 years. The conditions were deliberately harsh. The boys were given one garment, a simple cloak, to wear all year round. They slept on beds made of reeds that they had to cut themselves from the banks of the Eurotas River. Without knives, they were fed barely enough to survive. Starvation was a constant companion. The boys were expected to steal food to supplement their rations. But if they were caught stealing, they were flogged. Not for stealing, but for being caught. The lesson was clear. Stealth and cunning were virtues. Failure was a crime. The Spartan boy learned to move silently, to endure hunger, to bear pain without crying out. He learned to fight with his fists, with sticks, with stones. He learned to read and write just enough to understand military orders. He learned to sing the va songs of Sparta, songs that praised the dead who had fallen in battle and mocked the living who had failed. He learned the art of the laconic phrase, the short, sharp, cutting remark that was the hallmark of Spartan speech. When a foreigner asked the Spartan why his people used so few words, the Spartan replied, "Because we have nothing to say that is not worth hearing." Leonidas was not born to be a king. He was the third son of King Anaxandridas Roman II, a member of the Agoge dynasty, one of the two royal families that ruled Sparta simultaneously. Sparta had a unique system of dual kingship. Two kings, from two separate dynasties, ruled at the same time. This was a check on the power of any single ruler. The kings were the supreme commanders of the army, the chief priests of the state religion, and the final arbiters of Spartan law. But they were not absolute monarchs. They were subject to the authority of the ephors, a council of 5 elected officials who could overrule the kings, impeach them, and even sentence them to death. The Spartan system was a complex, carefully balanced machine designed to prevent any one man from accumulating too much power. Leonidas, as the third son, was not expected to sit on the throne. His older brothers, Cleomenes and Dorius, were ahead of him in the line of succession, but fate had other plans. Dorius, the second brother, was a man of immense ambition and restless energy. He could not bear to live under the rule of his older brother Cleomenes, who had become king after their father's death. Dorius left Sparta and embarked on a series of disastrous colonial expeditions. He was eventually killed in Sicily, fighting a battle he should never have fought. Cleomenes, the eldest, was a brilliant but unstable king. He led Sparta through a period of expansion and political intrigue. He was instrumental in crushing the city of Argos, Sparta's ancient rival, but his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He was accused of madness, deposed, imprisoned, and eventually died under mysterious circumstances. Some say he committed suicide, some say he was murdered. In the violent, unforgiving world of Spartan politics, the line between accident and assassination was thin. With Cleomenes dead and Dorius long buried, the throne of the Agoge dynasty passed to the third son, the man who was never supposed to be king, Leonidas. By the time Leonidas ascended to the throne, around 490 BC, he was already a mature man, probably in his late 40s or early 50s. He had survived the agoge. He had served in the Spartan army for decades. He had watched his brothers die. He knew the weight of the crown. He knew the expectations. A Spartan king was not a pampered despot. He was the first among equals, expected to live as simply as any Spartan citizen, to eat the same black broth, to train with the same brutal discipline, to lead from the front in battle. Leonidas embraced this role. He was, by all accounts, a man of few words and decisive action, a true Spartan, a man who had been forged in the fires of the agoge and tempered by decades of service. He was exactly the leader that Sparta needed, because a storm was gathering in the east, a storm that would test Sparta and its king to the absolute limit of human endurance. The Persian Empire was the superpower of the ancient world. Its territory stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, from the steppes of Central Asia to the deserts of Egypt. It controlled over 40% of the world's population. Its armies were numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Its wealth was beyond calculation. And in 480 BC, its king, Xerxes, decided to add Greece to his collection of conquered nations. The first Persian invasion, 10 years earlier, had been humiliatingly defeated at the Battle of Marathon. The Athenians, with a fraction of the Persian numbers, had shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. Xerxes was determined to avenge that defeat. He assembled the largest army the world had ever seen. Herodotus, the father of history, claims the Persian force numbered over 2 million men. Modern historians put the number at something closer to 200,000 to 300,000. Still, an army of unprecedented size, moving slowly across the Hellespont on a bridge of boats, darkening the earth with its numbers, drinking rivers dry as it passed. The Greek city-states were divided. Many submitted to Persia without a fight, sending earth and water, the tokens of submission, to Xerxes. Others, led by Athens and Sparta, prepared to resist. A council was held at the Isthmus of Corinth. The allies discussed strategy. Where could they stop the Persian juggernaut? The answer was a narrow coastal pass in central Greece called Thermopylae, the hot gates, named for the thermal springs that bubbled up from the ground. The pass was, at its narrowest point, only about 15 meters wide. On one side, the sea. On the other, a sheer mountain wall. A small forest, holding that pass, could block the entire Persian army, or at least, slow it down, buy time for the rest of Greece to mobilize. The Spartans were chosen to lead the land forces, but there was a problem. Sparta was in the middle of a religious festival. The Karnae, a sacred time when Spartan armies were forbidden to march to Vav. The Ephor, the ruling council, were reluctant to send the full Spartan army. They offered a compromise. A small advance force, led by one of the kings, would go to Thermopylae. They would hold the pass as long as possible. They would buy time, and they would die. Everyone knew this. The force was not an army. It was a suicide mission, a delaying action, a sacrifice, and the man chosen to lead it was Leonidas. Why Leonidas? Why the king? The Delphic oracle, the most sacred source of prophecy in the Greek world, had spoken. The oracle had declared that either Sparta would be destroyed by the Persians, or a Spartan king must die. Leonidas, when he heard the prophecy, understood his duty. He was the king. He would be the sacrifice. He selected 300 men to accompany him, not the strongest, not the youngest, the men who had sons, men whose family lines would continue after their deaths. Leonidas was thinking like a Spartan. The individual did not matter. The survival of the Spartan people, the Spartan state, the Spartan way of life, that was everything. He was not leading a glorious charge. He was leading a funeral procession, and every man who marched with him knew it. Who were the 300? The popular image, immortalized by movies and comic books, is of a band of young, beautiful, muscular warriors in leather briefs and red capes, fighting with acrobatic flair against the Persian horde. The reality was very different. The 300 were a cross-section of Spartan society. They were not all young. Many were in their 30s and 40s, veteran soldiers who had been fighting since they were 20. They were not fighting for abstract ideals of freedom and democracy. Sparta was not a democracy. It was a brutal military oligarchy that kept a massive population of helots, state-owned serfs, in brutal subjugation. The Spartans were not liberators. They were the oppressors of their own land. They fought for Sparta, for their king, for their brothers beside them, for the laws and customs that had shaped them, and for the most powerful motivating force in Spartan culture: shame. The fear of being seen as a coward, the fear of returning home without the respect of their peers, the fear of being less than what the agoge had demanded of them. Leonidas chose them carefully. They were men who had proven themselves in battle, men who had demonstrated the physical endurance, the mental toughness, and the unshakable discipline that the Spartan system demanded. They were the best of the best, not because they could perform superhuman feats of strength, but because they could be relied upon, absolutely, to follow orders, hold formation, and die without complaining. That was the Spartan definition of strength. The 300 were not alone. They were joined by several thousand allies from other Greek cities: Thespians, Thebans, Phocians, and others. The total Greek force at Thermopylae was probably around 7,000 men. The 300 Spartans were the core, the elite, the example. They were the ones who set the standard. They were the ones whose courage would inspire the others to fight. The allies knew the reputation of the Spartans. They knew that these men would never retreat. They knew that as long as the Spartans held, the line would hold. Leonidas positioned his forces at the narrowest point of the pass, rebuilding an old wall that had been constructed years earlier. He rotated his troops, sending different contingents to hold the front line, keeping the Spartans fresh for the critical moments. He sent the Phocians to guard a hidden mountain path that bypassed the pass. This path, the Anapa path, was the weak point. If the Persians found it, they could outflank the Greek position. Leonidas knew this. He warned the Phocians to be vigilant. For the first 2 days of the battle, the Greek strategy worked brilliantly. The Persian infantry, the famous immortals, the elite fighting force of the empire, were thrown against the Greek line again and again, and again and again. They were repulsed. The narrow pass negated the Persian numerical advantage. The longer spears of the Greeks, the heavier armor, the disciplined phalanx formation, all of these gave the defenders a decisive edge. The Persians died in heaps. The Greeks held. Xerxes, watching from his throne on a nearby hill, the said dev leaped to his feet 3 times in fear and rage as he watched his best troops being slaughtered. On the 3rd day, everything changed. A local Greek named Ephialtes, a man whose name would become a synonym for traitor for 2,000 years, came to the Persian camp. He had information. He knew about the hidden path. He offered to guide the Persians around the Greek position in exchange for a reward. Xerxes accepted. At night, a large force of Persian soldiers, led by Ephialtes, climbed the mountain path. The Phocians, who were supposed to be guarding it, heard the Persians approaching at the last moment. They were caught by surprise. They fought briefly, then retreated to higher ground. The path was open. The Persians poured through. Leonidas received the news early in the morning. The Persians were behind him. The pass was outflanked. He had a choice. He could retreat. He could save himself and most of his army. The other Greek contingents had already begun to withdraw. No one would blame him. He had held the pass for 2 days. He had bought precious time. The mission was accomplished, but Leonidas did not retreat. He dismissed the allied troops. He told them to go home, to live to fight another day. But he and his Spartans would stay. They would hold the pass to the end. They would buy as much time as they could for the retreating allies, and they would fulfill the prophecy. A Spartan king would die. The Thespians, a contingent of about 700 men from the city of Thespii, refused to leave. They would stay and die with the Spartans. The Thebans, whose loyalty was suspect, were compelled to stay. The final stand was about to begin. Leonidas led his men out of the narrow pass and into the wider area beyond. He knew that fighting in the open would allow the Persians to surround them. He did it anyway. He wanted to do as much damage as possible before the end. The Greeks fought with the fury of men who had already accepted death. Their spears broke, and they fought with swords. Their swords broke, and they fought with hands and teeth. Leonidas fell early in the final battle. A desperate fight erupted over his body. The Spartans drove the Persians back 4 times to recover the body of their king. They would not let him be taken. They fought on until every last man was killed. The Persians, enraged by the losses they had suffered, treated Leonidas' body with dishonor. Xerxes ordered his head cut off and impaled on a stake. This was a gross violation of Persian custom, which normally respected the bodies of brave enemies. It showed how deeply Leonidas had gotten under the skin of the great king, the man who had defied the might of the Persian Empire, who had made Xerxes leap from his throne in fear, was dead. But his mission was accomplished. The delay at Thermopylae had bought the Greek fleet time to regroup. A few weeks later, the Athenian navy would crush the Persian fleet at Salamis. The following year, the united Greek army would destroy the Persian land forces at Plataea. The invasion was defeated, Greece was saved, and Leonidas, the old king who had marched to his death, became a legend. So, what made Leonidas the strongest Spartan warrior? Not his muscles, not his weapons, not his tactical genius, though he certainly possessed that. What made Leonidas strong was something far deeper and far more difficult to achieve. It was the complete, total, and absolute conquest of the fear of death. The Spartans had a word for this. They called it euclid. It means good glory, but it is more than that. It is the glory that comes from a noble death, the glory that outlasts the body, the glory that becomes immortal. Leonidas achieved euclid. He achieved it by embracing the one thing that most human beings spend their entire lives trying to avoid. He embraced his own death. He did not just accept it. He chose it. He walked towards it with open eyes and a steady heart. This is the ultimate strength. This is the thing that the agoge was designed to produce. Not a warrior who can kill the most enemies, but a warrior who can face his own death without flinching. Because a man who does not fear death cannot be defeated. You can kill him, but you cannot break him. You can destroy his body, but you cannot touch his spirit. Leonidas, standing in that narrow pass, surrounded by the bodies of his friends, facing an army that stretched to the horizon, was the most powerful man in the world, not because of what he could do to the Persians, but because of what the Persians could not do to him. They could not make him afraid. They could not make him beg. They could not make him surrender. He was free in a way that few human beings have ever been free. The Spartans understood something that we, in our comfortable, modern world, have largely forgotten. Strength is not a physical attribute. It is a quality of the soul. It is forged in hardship. It is tested in extremity. It is proven in the moment when everything is lost except your will. Leonidas had been tested. He had been tested in the agoge, where he learned to endure cold, hunger, pain, and exhaustion. He had been tested in battle, where he had seen men die, and had killed men himself. He had been tested in politics, where he had navigated the treacherous waters of Spartan intrigue. And in the final test, the test of certain death, he did not waver. He did not falter. He did not fail. That is why he is remembered. That is why his name has survived for 2,500 years. Not because he won a great victory. He lost. He died. His body was mutilated. His army was annihilated. But he won something greater than victory. He won immortality. After the battle, the Persians continued their invasion. They marched on Athens and burned the city to the ground. But the Greek fleet, which had been given time to regroup by the sacrifice at Thermopylae, defeated the Persian navy at the Battle of Salamis. The invasion was effectively broken. The following year, at the Battle of Plataea, the Spartan-led Greek army crushed the remaining Persian land forces. The threat from the east was over. The body of Leonidas was eventually recovered by the Spartans. It was brought back to Sparta and buried with full honors. A heroine, a shrine to the dead hero, was built over his tomb. Leonidas was worshipped as a semi-divine figure, a hero whose spirit protected the city. His cult persisted for centuries. Pausanias, a Greek travel writer who visited Sparta in the 2nd century at nearly 700 years after the battle, reported that the tomb of Leonidas was still a site of reverence. The Spartans held annual games in his honor. Only Spartans were allowed to compete. The memory of Leonidas was carefully cultivated. It became a central part of Spartan identity. The city that had produced the ultimate warrior was proud of its son. The story of Thermopylae spread throughout the Greek world and beyond. Poets wrote verses about it. Historians recorded it. Philosophers debated its meaning. The Spartans themselves, famously laconic, said little. They did not need to. The story spoke for itself. A simple stone monument was erected at the site of the battle. It bore an inscription written by the poet Simonides. The words have echoed down the centuries. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, a hero, obedient to their laws, we lie. Our boast, not a celebration of victory, a simple statement of fact. We did what we were told. We obeyed our laws. We died. The epitaph is the perfect expression of Spartan values. It is not about individual glory. It is about duty. It is about submission to something greater than oneself. The 300 did not die for themselves. They died for Sparta. They died for the laws that had made them what they were. They died because Leonidas led them. And Leonidas died because he was the king, and a Spartan king does not run. The Leonidas we see in popular culture is a fantasy. The movie 300, based on the graphic novel by Frank Miller, depicts Leonidas as a young, muscular warrior king who defies the corrupt politicians of Sparta, leads a band of free men against the tyranny of Persia, and fights for reason, democracy, and Western civilization. Almost none of this is historically accurate. Leonidas was not young. He was an old man by the standards of his time. Sparta was not a democracy. It was a brutal military oligarchy that enslaved an entire population. The Spartans did not fight for freedom in any sense that we would recognize. They fought to preserve their own dominance, their own way of life, which was based on the violent subjugation of others. The Ephraim, whom the movie depicts as corrupt cowards, were the legitimate elected representatives of the Spartan state. Leonidas was not a rebel defying the system. He was the system. He was the king, the highest representative of the Spartan state, and he was carrying out its will. The battle itself has been heavily fictionalized. The Persians are depicted as monsters, ill-formed creatures, a horde of subhuman beasts. The reality is that the Persian army was a highly disciplined, professional fighting force, drawn from dozens of different cultures across a vast empire. Xerxes was not a giant, effeminate god-king covered in piercings. He was a competent, determined ruler leading the most powerful military machine of the age. The Spartans did not fight in leather briefs and capes. They fought in heavy bronze armor. The battle was not a victory for the Greeks. It was a catastrophic defeat. The point of Thermopylae was not to win. It was to die. And Leonidas accomplished that mission perfectly. Does this mean the story is a lie? Not at all. The core of the story is true. Leonidas did lead a small force to Thermopylae. He did hold the pass against overwhelming odds. He did dismiss his allies when the position was compromised. He did stay and die with his 300 Spartans. He did all of this knowing that it would cost him his life. The historical reality, stripped of the Hollywood gloss, is more impressive, not less. An old king, leading a suicide mission, following the laws and customs of a harsh and unforgiving society, buying time with his blood for the rest of Greece to mobilize. This is not a story about freedom versus tyranny. It is a story about duty, about honor, about the willingness to sacrifice everything for something larger than the self. That story transcends the specific political context of ancient Sparta. It speaks to something deep in the human spirit, the capacity to face death without fear, the ability to choose a meaningful end over a meaningless existence. That is what Leonidas represents. That is why we still tell his story. What can we learn from Leonidas? What can a Spartan king who died 2,500 years ago possibly teach us about strength in the modern world? The answer, I believe, is profound. We live in a culture that is obsessed with a very narrow definition of strength. Strength is muscles. Strength is power. Strength is the ability to dominate others, to win, to succeed, to accumulate wealth and status. Leonidas offers a completely different model of strength, a model based on sacrifice and the conquest of fear. The strongest man at Thermopylae was not the one who killed the most Persians. The strongest man was the one who knew he was going to die and stayed anyway. The one who put the good of his people above his own survival. The one who understood that some things are worth dying for. This is a challenging message in a world that tells you, constantly, at your own comfort, your own pleasure, your own survival is the highest good. Leonidas stands as a rebuke to that idea. He stands as a reminder that human beings are capable of something greater, that we are not just animals driven by instinct. We are creatures who can choose. We can choose to sacrifice. We can choose to serve. We can choose to face our fears and, in doing so, transcend them. The Spartan system that produced Leonidas was brutal, inhumane, and, by modern standards, morally repugnant. I am not suggesting we revive the agoge or abandon children on mountainsides, but we can learn from the Spartans' understanding of how strength is forged. Strength comes from hardship. It comes from pushing yourself beyond what you thought was possible. It comes from enduring pain and coming out the other side. It comes from discipline, from training, from the daily, unglamorous grind of doing what needs to be done, whether you feel like it or not. The Spartans understood that comfort is the enemy of strength. A life without challenge is a life without growth. A life without sacrifice is a life without meaning. Leonidas was strong because his entire life had been a preparation for that final moment at Thermopylae. Every day of the agoge, every battle, every loss, every hardship, it all led to that narrow pass. And when the moment came, he was ready, not because he was born ready, because he had been forged. The sun set on Thermopylae on the third day of the battle. The bodies of the dead lay heaped in the pass. The Persians had won. The road to Athens was open. But somewhere, in the camp of Xerxes, there must have been a flicker of doubt. A question that the great king could not quite silence. If this is what 300 men can do, what will happen when we face the full army of Sparta? The answer came at Plataea, with a Spartan phalanx, 1,000 strong, crushed the Persian army and ended the invasion. Leonidas did not live to see it. He died in the pass, his body pierced by Persian arrows and spears, his head impaled on a stake. But his death was not the end of his story. It was the beginning. His name has survived empire, wars, the rise and fall of civilizations. It has survived because it represents something that human beings have always recognized as noble. The willingness to die for something greater than yourself. The courage to face the impossible with steady eyes and a calm heart. The strength to say, I will not run. I will not surrender. I will stand. That is the legacy of Leonidas, the strongest Spartan warrior. Not the strongest in body, the strongest in spirit. The man who proved that the ultimate victory is not to survive. The ultimate victory is to make your death mean something. To turn your defeat into a triumph that echoes down the ages. Leonidas did that. He is still doing it. Every time someone reads the story of Thermopylae, every time someone hears the words of the epitaph, every time someone is inspired to face their own fears, their own battles, their own impossible odds, Leonidas is there. The old king. The Lion of Sparta, still standing in the pass, still refusing to move, still showing us what it means to be strong. Thank you for watching. If you made it to the end, you have walked through the fire with the Spartans. Leave a comment, tell me what you think. Would you have stayed in the past? Like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear what a real Spartan was. I will see you in the next one.